Welcome, everybody. It is the 31st of July. It is Black Tot Day, the 54th anniversary of the Royal Navy ending their rum ration. And today I am joined by our master blender, Mr. Oliver Chilton himself. Hey, Ollie, how you doing?
I'm good, Mitch. How are you?
Very good. So we thought we'd do something special today because obviously we have our brand new Master Blenders Reserve 2024, which is out now. If you've tried it, I hope you love it. It's our latest in the lineup, and it's actually the 5th year of us releasing these annual limited editions, starting with 50th anniversary in 2020 and coming all the way through to 2024 now. So what we thought we'd do is do a little side-by-side, a comparison, and talk through the last 5 years of what Ollie's been blending together. For those of you who want to skip to a particular rum, we'll put in the timestamps and let you know where to go to if you just want to look at the new one. But for the rest of you who might want to taste along and talk through the blends with us, yeah, grab your master blenders and pour some glasses, and we'll go through it all with you now. So to give everyone some backstory, Black Tot began back in 2010 with a bottling of the Black Tot Last Consignment. This was taken from the Navy rum flagons, which Sukhinder Singh, our founder, was able to obtain and bring together. It really is one of the world's most unique historical rums. If you want to try what the Navy were drinking on the ships this day, 54 years ago, you can get it. Black Tot Last Consignment. There's not a lot of bottles left, but yeah, whilst it still exists, it's an amazing part of rum history, which we were privileged enough to be able to bottle. For the first 10 years of Black Tot, that was really the only rum that we had, save a release of Black Tot 40-year-old, which came out around 2015, a 40-year-old Demerara rum distilled in the Port Morant still, whilst it was still at Iflet. And then around 2019, it was decided to start expanding the range and start creating some new blends to carry on Black Tot as a brand, because those historic rums, though amazing, are about to run out. And once they're gone, we can't really make them again because a lot of those distilleries and places don't exist anymore. So, Ollie, maybe we can start there. But what can you tell us a little bit about that first idea, how those conversations with Sukhinder first began about creating this new era of Black Tot rum?
Well, I guess we started with wanting to have a rum that we could talk about every day. The great thing about Last Consignment is you're capturing time. The terrible thing about Last Consignment is you can't open that many bottles because otherwise it will disappear. So it makes it a bit more challenging to share and to talk about. We also were keen to make a rum that everybody could get into. Last Consignment is a very specific style. It's very heavy, very rich, very decadent, very dense. So we were trying to make something a little fruitier and a little lighter and a little bit more approachable, which is what became Finest Caribbean. It's still a fairly rich rum, fairly sweet, but not quite as heavy and dense and full of licorice as Last Consignment. That took us about 2 years of messing around and learning about rum. It was very much a journey, still is a journey. Like a lot of things with elixir distillers, you kind of start something with no timeline. You think, oh, we'll get round to it when we get round to it. And then when you finally get to the point of launching it, you realize you've got loads of other work to do and other things to find. So it wasn't a plan. We didn't have a plan to have a great extended brand or anything else. It started life as, let's make another rum that we can talk about every day that celebrates the kind of blending history of Navy rum and bringing together rums. And then it's kind of grown arms and legs from there to end up with Master Blenders Reserve, and in the last 5 years of learning about rum and new releases.
And Yeah, it's grown into something I think quite incredible, and certainly one of the world's most complex, uh, most interesting, most exciting blends to have a look at. Um, and hopefully, one of the things which we're really proud of at Black Tot is the transparency piece that we give with that. So it really allows people to see what you're doing behind the scenes, see the rums that you've been playing with and working with, and how they all come together. Um, for those of you who might be just discovering Black Tot or finding us for the first time, I want to show you a little bit of the history and how Last Consignment first came about. So we'll have a look here. Here you can see a navy rum box which contains a couple of rum flagons. And as you can see, these boxes are pretty tough to get into. They're wrapped in tin, they're nailed shut. You have to crowbar them open. Inside, you will find two rum flagons like this, hopefully still intact. There are little clues on these boxes like PKD 1155 you see on the left there. That means packed in November 1955 and allows us to date where these flagons come from. Inside, they're filled with sawdust. They are messy when you take them out. And inside, you will find rum flagons like this. So covered in wicker to help protect them knocking against each other. Underneath this glazed ceramic, which is airtight, so it doesn't breathe like an amphora. It keeps the rum intact as long as this wax seal on top is still there. And this wax seal, if this is intact, this is really important for us because it tells us where and when this flagon was bottled. So 12-70, December 1970, 5 months after Black Tot Day. We're incredibly lucky to be able to have this collection, thanks to Sekinder. And obviously, this is what made up our first ever bottle of rum, Black Tot Last Consignment, which you may have seen or heard about. It really is, one of the world's most incredible blends of rum and captures this moment in time from the Navy. What I think is so exciting, though, is from the 50th anniversary of Black Tot Day, when we started these blends, Ollie really started creating, you had this amazing idea and amazing liquid to work with. And it really, I mean, I'd never seen a rum blend like it when you first looked at Black Tot 50th anniversary.
Yeah, I mean, Black Tot 50th was, we'd taken the leap into blending rum for the first time and learning about that with a lot of help, a lot of support, and from the wider industry and particularly from our supplier at the time. But 50th anniversary was probably closer to the world we normally lived in that we were dealing with individual casks of rum. I think a little bit like children, we were very innocent. So some of the bits that other companies wouldn't touch, wouldn't do because it would be sacrilege, really didn't mean anything to us as such. So I didn't really think of anything to using Corona in a blend because it worked. So why wouldn't you? Or, if you wanted something to have a feel of, older rum, and you wanted to have this really rich, heavy licorice note, then you'd use, 40-plus-year-old Guyana rum from Cormorant. It's the only way to make that flavour. Because we came from a slightly different background, I think it gave us a certain amount of freedom. And it was a great way to learn, frankly, in terms of the transparency and sharing the recipe. And that was you, Mitch. That was all on you. And again, we come from originally from a kind of whiskey world, and in Scotch whiskey you can share very limited amounts of information. In rum you can share everything if you want to, which is a fantastic luxury to have. So when you're asked, could we do this? The answer is always, well, I guess so. There's no any reason not to. The argument for not sharing the recipe would always have been, well, someone will copy it. And I guess the answer to that is, good luck trying to copy what we do. Probably quite an expensive hobby. So yeah, 50th was, for lots of reasons, a fantastic project and really interesting thing. We ended up not starting it until 2019, so it was a relatively quick turnaround. And in terms of style, it was. I think of it as a little bit of an argument between myself and Sekinder. Sekinder wanted a rum that was a real nod to the Navy rum, real nod to the last consignment, and had that heavy, rich, decadent feel. And I love fruity, estery, bright rums. And we had two different styles of rums on the table. I very much aired towards the fruitier side. So 50th kind of represents that. It is heavier. I mean, there's no doubt Sekinder definitely won the battle, and we bottled on the heavier side. But you still will find a certain amount of fruit in there, and a kind of tropical backbone to it. And that's the nod. That's my bit coming through, saying it needs to be a little bit more modern, and it needs to talk about these kind of flavors.
Yeah, it's a tremendous rum. So let's have a little look at the blend here. So this, what you see on the screen here, is actually the back label on our bottle. To my knowledge, we were the first rum brand in the world to put full blend percentages and everything actually on the label. And yeah, it just gives you a little insight into some of the casks and the liquids you're working with here. So if you have some at home, please pour yourself a glass and join us for the tasting. I mean, this for a lot of people is a lot of people's favorites, I think, because it was the first, and it was the first time anyone really saw us doing anything like this, or anyone, to be honest. It's still an incredible rum. It's so nice to revisit it 5 years in. What was your experience? I mean, obviously you've blended whiskey for years. You blend our Porterskeg, elements of Islay, single malts of Scotland. You've worked with casks and flavor for so many years on the whiskey side. How was it coming over to the rum side to put together a blend like this?
In some ways, rum's easier because certainly compared to just working in, say, Scotch, you've got a really wide portfolio of flavors to work with, and it's lots of different styles, and it's a bit like cooking. If you've got lots of spices to work with, you can put things together, you can find a balance. The other side of it is that you're coming to something fresh and new, so you've got a lot to learn. Still got a lot to learn, frankly, but it means that you're always trying things, looking at the flavors, and then trying to discover why that's caused. Whereas maybe in whiskey, I already have a good idea before I'm going in what it's probably going to taste like, which I didn't really have in rum. But I think the thing that I found most joyful about it is that you can really taste in different rums. You can taste the cultures. You can taste the history and the development. I'm a great believer that flavor and spirit is dictated entirely by culture and people, and I think you can taste places in spirits because of the people. So what I loved about 50th was it was a great example of, you're looking at not just different countries and what their flavor of rum is like, you're also looking at history. So you're looking at much older styles and different techniques, and trying to bring that together to find balance. So, I mean, I unapologetically, Master Blends Reserve 50th anniversary being the first one in that was both the most challenging thing I do each year from a blending point of view, and probably the most enjoyable challenge, because you're dealing with so many differences and so many complexities.
I remember you saying once to me how whiskey has so many nuances and so many fine details in between various cask distilleries, but rum has the extremities. It has the range, and so many different styles and flavors to work with.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. That's for me true. There's obviously an awful lot of column distillate rum that's quite clean and simple, and there's a lot of bulk rum traded like that. But because you have these different cultural pinpoints, these different ways of producing, and you're dealing with so many different countries, you do end up with this real vast number of quite extreme styles, from the really heavy estery kind of Jamaican stuff through to the verging on dank, heavy, almost cumbersome rums from Guyana. And I think the great thing in rum is if you blend those together, you can find amazing balance, and you can find complexity. Maybe that's probably I find a lot of the complexity that you can build in rum is from blending countries together, rather than looking at individual styles. Obviously, I'm biased.
No, absolutely. And I think this is one of the interesting things, you know, when we look at rum's history and we look at how we talk about rum and how we, you know, pay our dues and talk properly about the provenance of some of these rums. You know, I think this is one of the things that's often been left out of blending and talking about. You know, it's so common for people to talk about their secret recipes or secret blends, or not talk about where the rum's coming from. And you know, personally for myself, I think for rum blends like ourselves to stay relevant and to be contributing into the rum world in the way I think we need to, I think it's so important that we give highlights to these distilleries, to these places, that, you know, we really champion why these individual regions are so unique and so expressive and so important as part of the blend. And you know, I really hope when someone sees you know, things like a back label of 50th anniversary, if they're not already familiar with all those distilleries, it's a great way for them to go, maybe I'll check these out, you know, and start to decode some of the other bottles they're seeing on shelves in bars and retailers as well. So, flavor wise, Ollie, what are you hoping for people to find in the 50th? What's the what was the goal, the main takeaways that you would like people to have?
I think the main thing I was looking for was to get to a point where it was deep, rich, and opulent. It did have that kind of classic navy licorice density to it, but with just a hint more elegance than maybe you'd find in traditional navy rums. A little bit more balanced, a bit of that kind of chocolate on the palate, that, you know, bitter chocolate. You know, you get those high ester chocolates where it's very bitter, but you get fruit coming through as well. I just want people to explore it in terms of that weight and the depth of flavors, and see that you can have these heavy opulent rums, but if you just use just enough, things like ham being a great example, you can add in some fruits, you can balance that. I would say, for me, the thing I find most interesting about kind of rums we were using is because we were using such a range of ages, you could still get that that feeling of age. You get that feeling of very old rums coming through those like dusty books and dank floors. That's still there, but you can maintain that freshness as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's obviously some distilleries here people are very familiar with, but also some of these older components like the 23-year-old Caroni, the 42-year-old Port Morant, which for anyone who's following us from the very start of the Black Tot journey, is the same component from our Black Tot 40-year, but with an extra 2 years aging as well. And then some flagons of Navy rum, which I think that's probably one of the parts which sometimes maybe gets missed or glossed over, but it's even that in itself is quite an incredible thing to be adding some of these last remaining flagons into the blend each year. What was the reasoning? What was the decision to do that? Where did that come from?
So that came purely out of Agenda. We actually still do it this way each year. We create the blend first, and then we add flagons at the end when we think we're close. In terms of 50th anniversary, we'd got quite far down the way of the blend in terms of what we wanted. And then just at the point that we were ready to move the casks, Sukhinder said to me, you know, it really misses that slight polish, that slight, well, basically that nod to age that last consignment has. And he said, what happens if you just put a little bit in, like 0.5%? And so we sat there I started dropping in small amounts of last consignment, flagon liquid, into the samples, into the bench samples, and it worked. It made a difference. I mean, it sounds really silly to 0.5% can make a difference, but it does make a difference. It really changes the whole feel of the blend. It really pops probably more on the nose than it does on the palate, but it's there. And because we did that, we added the flagons. Originally, we hadn't really planned to talk about that at all until you'd asked us to put everything on the back of the label. But it's kind of like a lot of things with Black Tot. We're trying things for flavor. We're trying to do things so it tastes the way we want it to taste, and then we kind of afterwards think, oh well, do we talk about this? How do we communicate what we're doing?
It's very simple and easy from my side, Ollie. Thank you for making it so straightforward. No, it really is a phenomenal rum, and I guess for a moment it might have seemed like this was going to be the only annual edition that we did, and then suddenly we were doing it every year. So
yeah, I mean, so firstly, when we initially said we'd do something for the 50th anniversary, we really hadn't planned to do anything specifically afterwards. It wasn't an ongoing objective. We were still learning about the flagons. One of the things that I find most fascinating is that the Navy rum seems to have been somewhat of an organic growth. You know, even rums used by the Navy seems to be largely based in chance and happenstance, and this movement to it being a core part of tradition happened over many years. So we planned to do one bottling, celebrate Navy rum, and then while we were doing the bottling, we had this incident at the bottling hall where essentially I'd purchased additional rum. I'm always buying rum, right? That's part of the job. Always buy too much rum. It's always have to have too much. So I'd over purchased on the Jamaican rum, thinking, oh, I might use it for another project in the future. You never know what you might need. And the bottling hall who were doing the vatting for us accidentally vatted an extra cask of Hamden, you know, which was slightly problematic. We didn't know that until we got the vat sample. So you always get a vat sample. If you can't go up to the bottling hall, they send you a sample. And what with it being 2020, obviously transport and travel is starting to become a little bit more tricky. So they sent us a vat sample down. We tried it and it was wrong. It wasn't where it should be at all. So having looked at the operation warrant, figured out what happened. I then made a lot of calls. I bought more rum, a lot more rum. And we couldn't buy enough that we could replicate the blend, but twice as big to make up for the cask. So we had to adjust the recipe quite a bit. I think in the end, I was actually happier with the final recipe. We made a better rum. However, we'd already purchased all the packaging for the bottling, so that was kind of fixed. That was a fixed amount that we had, and we had about, roughly speaking, a third too much rum. So I vividly remember phoning you and saying, well, here's the thing, we've got a third too much rum, so I'm thinking of starting a perpetual blend for next year as the base of next year, which I think made you very happy. In some ways, this made me look a lot more at the original rum, the Navy rum and the flagons, and think a lot more about what was going on there. This is the kind of historic message, and you see a lot of brands, Navy rum brands, talking about recipes and things being fixed. We've always known that's not true. The more you look into it, the more you see that things are never fixed. And unsurprisingly, cultures change, availabilities change, everything is fluid. And I feel like rum is a great example of that. Rum historically responds largely to politics and war, and it responds to environmental factors, and availability is dictated by those things. So it was a great example for us to explore that as an idea and talk about change. So we kept our third back, and I'm not going to lie, I saw it as an opportunity to release the rum that I really wanted versus the ones that Kinder really wanted, and to try and build this idea of a citrus bomb as a point of difference.
Nice. Well, let's go on then to the 2021 Master Blenders. So essentially the 51st anniversary of Black Tot Day for this one. We were told 51st anniversary was not was not a prominent enough number or date to put on the label.
I mean, I preferred it as a name, as you well know. I had a little interest in Master Blenders Reserve, but
I will say for the record that it was Sukhinder who decided on the name Master Blenders Reserve. Oliver Chilton, if you've ever have had the pleasure of meeting him, is far too humble to ever call himself a master blender, because
it's not about humility, about experience. But I mean, in some ways, it's quite it's a nice thing that you can say that you you have a reserve that you're pulling from. It makes me laugh. There's a great reviewer online who often goes on about how we're so generous as blenders sharing our stocks. It's nice to point out that at least we only take your money, not your children. So it's not too bad. In the Navy, they took your time. So it's not bad at all.
Well, comparatively, it's a bargain then. So the 2021, again, in this era of Master Blenders Reserve, you're still, we're still working with 9 different components, still incredible components. This was the first year we included some Australian rum as well from the amazing Beanley distillery over in Australia. What was your decision to add that in, actually? Because I know it's a historical part of the Navy blend, and they did blend Australian rum in there from time to time. But flavor wise, what was that offering that perhaps the other casks weren't on that year?
So the Beanley was really oily. We've been trying. Well, we have rum from all over the world, and we tried some Beanley that, frankly, I just really liked it. We bought it mainly because I thought we might do something with this in the future for something completely different. And it was really oily, and it had this kind of dense citrus fruit thing. And I was absolutely determined that I wanted to kind of celebrate citrus and make it this really zesty rum. As you say, we still only had kind of 9 components, so it still fits on the back of the label. And it was, if you look through them, there's a lot of Trinidad, there's a lot of the hand was pretty much the same, just a little bit older. But yeah, we very much were like, okay, let's try and make this zesty and notably different to 50th anniversary. One of the things I find most interesting about the flagons is that if you look at when they're bottled, if you open different bottling dates, they're different rums. And then you look at the history, and the reason they're different rums is because the purchasing was changing. As you said, that the Navy historically would use Australian rum, and it's being swapped in for something else that isn't available based on production yields, where ships are going, based on trading and things like political incidents, war, that kind of thing, will change up where things are being bought from. And if you look through the records, you can find rum being purchased from pretty much every country, both in what's now the Commonwealth, to places like Cuba, which you wouldn't think. It just happened to be that a ship landed there, so you could do a deal. And I think that's really fascinating. I think it's a story that needs to be celebrated, because if otherwise you're trying to sell this idea that everything's static, that, oh, we've made the best thing ever and that's it, we're never going to improve, nothing's ever going to change. My God, if that was mankind, we'd all be dead already. You know, the human race is if nothing else, an example of how good change is. So, you know, that we need to change our rum each year to show that, to show how rum historically has been changing, how spirits are changing. They change with culture and with people.
I think that's something which, yeah, and it's fascinating to see across the whole lineup of MBRs, especially when we taste them side by side like this, just how much difference there is from year to year. And for anyone lucky enough to be able to have collected all 5 so far, I think when you do a tasting like this and you see how much it changed and evolved over the years, it's quite exciting. They all bring their own unique thing to the table, and for a lot of people, I think the 2021 has a slightly funkier, fruitier, slightly more intense estery note, which is coming through. Which obviously anyone who loves their funk and their Jamaica really shines. But it's interesting when you look at things like the blend percentages, is that it doesn't always tell you the whole story. You know, the Jamaica is still quite a small component in there, and yet the way you've blended this together somehow brings that fruit and that funk to the forefront on this year's blend.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I say, I think you've got other things in there, such as the rums from Trinidad had this real big kind of stone fruit peaches thing, which I really fell in love with, particularly in this rum. And then because you haven't got some things as heavy in your face, like Guyana's not as heavy. You don't have some of those much older rums there. You don't have the Coroni, which is very oily, petrolly, diesely, where instead you do have the Beanley, which is oily, but it's not diesely, it's not as dense. So it allows those things to shine a little bit more, and maybe also they accentuate some of their fruit as well.
Yeah, it's yeah, and when you look at the blend that way and you see those old TDLs and the Beanley and the Hampton all coming together, and you're right, it's interesting. The Guyana is quite light on this year's rum, which again, when we look at the whole 5 next to each other, is interesting to see where you've gone heavier versus this lighter Guyanese style. It definitely allows that fruit to shine a lot more. One other, I guess, interesting part to note. So on the label, you'll see the perpetual reserve as well. This is not a term which is commonly used in rum. I'm fairly sure we might be the only ones at the moment using this term. So obviously this is referring to the 50th anniversary components and the flagons, which in the case of the 50th anniversary was actually put into sherry casks over the period of time between the 50th to the 2021. With the sherry cask, were you using any particular type, or?
These were refill sherry butts, so they would have originally held probably Oloroso, and then they've been used for whiskey for a few years, well, quite a few years, and then they've been holding rum. We weren't looking to add flavour, so we're not using vessels to add flavour. We're actually, you know, we're migrating to larger and larger vessels where we can, so that you add less, basically. But we did find that they did pick up some fruit off those casks. The other thing you don't want is you want relatively inner wood. Not saying that the previous contents don't add anything, but what you don't want is lots of wood contact, which actually, if you use very new casks, if you use brand new sherry butts, the first thing you're going to extract is wood. It's not anything to do with the previous content, and we really didn't want that. So it's trying to use wood. It's trying to use casks that you're not going to extract loads of wood tannins and things like that, because that's going to be really dominant in your blend, and that's not what we're looking for here. We're looking to celebrate rum.
And I think a question I don't think I've asked you before, but when you're putting that previous year's blend into those casks, is that going in at the 54.5, the reduced level, or is it pre the dilution?
The funny thing is, I was going in at 54.5. It wasn't intentionally like that. So we did that the first year because they vatted everything and then dropped it, and then we put it to wood. And then we've continued doing that. So your extractions tend to be a little bit sweeter if you're at lower strength. Another reason not to use anything too active, because you would extract a lot of wood sugars. So you kind of want to avoid that. But the good thing is that if you keep the alcohol low, the real thing that's going to work on it is oxygen more than anything else. So you get nice aeration. You get basically a development of soft mint. It'll tend to allow more essentially esterification, so you get more fruit developing over that time, although obviously it's a relatively short time, probably only 6 to 9 months ends up living in those casks. We do have additional stock from each year, so we keep back some of each year in wood. I mean, we're probably going to go on to MBR's just growing arms and legs and got slightly more complicated as we've built it, because a lot of the time we weren't using, we'd use multiple casks to build up what we needed for each country. But sometimes, like the first year when we were doing second year with Hamden, we didn't need 2 casks. You need 1 or 1.5. So you end up with a residual stock, and it's the same with pretty much everything. You end up with residual stock, and then it's suddenly like, okay, well, we need to put that somewhere. We need to do something with it. So you end up creating lots of smaller blends, intermediate blends to work with. On the terminology, just on the perpetual blend, as you say, no one else uses that term. We thought long and hard about that. I think the term Solera has been used quite a lot. It's used in rum and whiskey. The thing is, it's a legal term. It has provenance, and it means something in Spain. And we're not running this for a system of casks. Okay, and you know, the original Navy rum wasn't run for a system of casks. It run for a system of vats. And if you sit down and you look at what terminology is used to describe that action in the drinks world, closest to what you're doing, then the closest thing would be what happens in France and Champagne. So it made sense to us to adopt that terminology because it better expresses what we're doing. And though obviously not everyone's reading that back the label and saying, I know what that means, I do think that in the modern world, if people can Google stuff, you want them to be able to Google the right term and find out a bit about it. You don't want people Googling Solera and then looking at you like, so you have a big system of casks for this. No, really, that's not how it works. So we're trying to kind of change that bit of conversation and be a little bit more accurate with what we're doing. Hopefully it's not creating too much confusion. A nice talking point maybe for you, Mitch, maybe.
That's it. Well, I think it keeps people like Dawn Davies very happy, so that's always a good thing. And yeah, I mean, Solera is one of those, probably one of the most misused terms in the rum world and whiskey world, as you say. So it's almost as soon as any blend gets slightly too complicated, we just slap a Solera on it and sort of try to justify it that way. So yeah, no, again, you know, for me, this ties back into our transparency as a brand, and hopefully is one of the things that the people who've come to know us appreciate, is that we're yeah, it's not always the simplest, but you do have all the information and it is accurate. So let's go on to then where the blend started to get a bit more complicated with 2022. So we had a nice easy first couple of years. We could fit all the information on the back label. There was only 9 different components. It was quite easy to talk about. Then what happened?
So we so it's fair to say what sometimes happens if you don't have clear and very precise direction for your blender, and he's allowed a white piece of paper, mayhem ensues. I think I was listening to a fantastic program on this, on terms of the fear of the white piece of paper. I've never really had that. I quite like a blank canvas and no one to interrupt me. And I've been playing with this idea of trying to make a blend of Jamaican rums. I loved the idea of trying to temper the extremities that a lot of people seem to be talking about and celebrating in the rums from Jamaica. And I was trying to do it with much older rums and trying to bring a whole load of things together. And in the end, I created a rum that had 9 rums in it, just all from one country. But it wasn't really useful to Black Tot, and we didn't have anywhere else for it to live. So I'd made this thing, and I liked it as an ingredient. I thought it was a fantastic example, and it added age, and it added fruit, but it had already tempered fruit. So we kind of,
this was your Jamaica component, first of all.
Just the Jamaican component, yeah. That's where I started. And meanwhile, Sukhinder, because Black Tot MBR is a project between the two of us, it's not just mine. Sukhinder's had a completely different idea, and he really loved the idea of trying to take a historic rum, take the flavors in it, and try to recreate that using modern rums. He thought, blending is so powerful that you can dissect something and then try to put it back together using completely different ingredients. So he came to me and he brought me a bottle of Barbancourt from the 1960s, I think, and said, look, is this possible? And it's a funny one, Barbancourt, because although it's not molasses based, it is, at least then, it was very heavy, and it's very rich, very chocolatey, and not like, I guess, what I would have thought as modern day sugarcane rums, not non-molasses based rums, which I find to be really fruit driven, really light and fun and like big, but they don't have that density and weight, which this definitely did. While I was drinking it, I was thinking, the fruit in this is really reminiscent to the fruit I've got over there in this Jamaican blend. So I started playing with different countries to create different flavors. So the whole thing became, I wrote a whole list of flavors that I found in the Barbancourt, and then I tried to create each flavor individually using a different country. And the reason for doing that was just the challenge. You see something, you think, I wonder if that's possible. I wonder if I can create that. And then the idea was I would blend those together at the end. I don't think we got to an end point which tasted the same. I'm quite transparent about that. No, we did not recreate the exact things Sukhinder asked us to do. But what we did do is we took all those flavors and represented them in a different way. So when you try it, I think you will find the kind of keynotes I wrote down for the Barbancourt were like chocolate, like dusty chocolate, and I think that really pops out. There are fruit. There's the stone fruit note. Again, it's kind of verging on like cooked stone fruit, and the citrus in that rum was really well aged. It had this kind of, again, dustiness to it, dankness to it, and that's really that Jamaican component. It's not huge, but it really pops through. It really comes through. So it was just a new challenge, a new way of looking at rum, a new way of blending it, and I hope that at least it kind of delivers this idea of a complete thing from so many different things. I think we ended up using over 22 different rums in it in the end by creating all these individual blends.
Well, yeah, and when we look at the full breakdown here and the full list, I mean, it's it's incredible, to have one just that Jamaica component that you started off with. I think the youngest component in there, 22 year up to 27 year. Uh, Mount Gay and Foursquare together for the Barbados component. These amazing casts of DDL in there as well, including some 30-year DDL. I mean, Trinidad, just blending some Caroni, why not? Again, I think I think that's one of my favorite parts when I talk to people who are learning about this for the first time, who are into their rum. They're like, you have a cask of Caroni? It's like, yeah, yeah. It's like, and you blended it? It's like, yeah, it's
Well,
delicious.
I mean, to be fair, currently was made to be blended. It's not like I don't think there was anyone making that rum thinking, you know what, people are definitely gonna sip on this rum in all the bars around the world. They're gonna have this in their mojitos every day. I mean, it was if you think back to when it was being used by the Navy, and it would have been used by the Navy, it's a blending component, it's a heavy rum that was used in blends. So
They didn't account for Luca and the rum nerds.
no, they did not. No, no one saw liquor coming. Um, But I think it's a great rum to use like that because it's very expressive. I personally struggle to sit and sip it on its own. It's too much for me. It's too dense for me. But I think as a component, it's amazing because it's a great platform to build on. So yeah, it's obviously slightly bigger than we've previously done in terms of things we used. That also allowed us to use a much larger array of like older things because you can manage that a bit better in terms of everything from quantity, the amount of casks available. Funny enough, the amount of very old casks of rum available are a lot less than the amount of young rum available. And even in terms of price and what you're buying and how you're using it, you've just got more freedom by using so many more ingredients.
Well, coming back to the Caroni for a second, because I found with a lot of Caronis, some of them are very heavy, diesely, that very petrol kind of driven style. But then at the same time, you get some of these essentially lighter style ones, which are very fruit forward and very expressive. And for me personally, I much prefer as a style. When you're looking at a component like Caroni, are you choosing between the two? Are you aiming for a certain one? And what specifically is that bringing to the blend that other components might not?
So I guess the real difference with Currently for us is we don't have that information recorded on a sheet. We've just got tasting notes, right? And you're now talking about quite significantly older rums. So the further away you go from the point at which it was distilled, maybe the more difficult it is to tell the differences. Although obviously the really diesely ones are quite easy to spot. So when we're using it, we're actually doing it on a cask by cask basis. We go and try all of our stock, retry all of our stock, and then choose what we're going to use depending on what we're trying to make. So the great example would be, I think in this blend we did use something that was more diesely, it was heavier. Whereas in the most recent in 2024 that we're going to try in a bit, we've obviously used Caroni again, but it was a very different style, and it was more fruit led. So I guess the answer is yes, but not in a sense that I've got a list of the distillate styles because it seems, or at least on our paperwork, it's not recorded. So we're more working kind of cask by cask.
Mm. And I think it is interesting when even when you look at some of the Vellier bottlings of Caroni, and there's such a wide range that come out of it, and even though supposedly they're only working with a couple of different styles, this heavy style or light style, I suppose when the cask has long enough to go in whichever direction that flavor is going, you can really start to get some vast differences over that many years now as well.
I guess that's true. I'd also say in that this is just a bit of conjecture, but if you're changing between even two styles, there's a period of time where you're changing between two styles, right? And you're not throwing that spirit away. No one's throwing anything away. And chances are you've got one, maybe two very large tanks that you're filling up to ship out from. So the thing about spirits production, rum production, is it's not fixed, right? Everyone treats these things like there's a fixed recipe. There's one way of doing it, and this is how we do it forever. It's never like that. You're always making changes, small changes. You're making small changes to try to get to the same endpoint. You know, it can be as simple as things like the distillery broke down. So just because just because you stop distilling doesn't mean you stop fermenting. And especially if you're talking about something really active, like sugar and sugar fermentations, you're going to get big changes quite quickly. You've got temperature changes throughout the year. All of these things affect your production unless you kind of close the loops. And most of these distilleries, particularly looking at something like Coroni that's last choice, older, when you're looking at older production without a lot of modern technology, you're going to have changes all the time that you're trying to manage as a distiller. That's basically what you pay your distiller to do, to manage the changes. What we try as customers, as consumers, or as blenders, is you're trying something years later with no record of what changed that day or how it was run. So as much as I'm a spirits geek, I love production detail. Like, I want to know how people are making their thing and what they're doing. I'm also acutely aware that you're always trying a point in time. You're always trying just one day's or one point in time, at the same time as always trying something that's an amalgamation of all these small changes in time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fascinating to have these snapshots into, especially a lost distillery like Caroni. You know, and I think even that story is interesting for people to realize when you look back at the history of Caroni and part of its challenges of staying afloat and staying open. You know, Caroni was one of the biggest suppliers to the Royal Navy. You know, they sold a tremendous amount of rum because of the Navy blend. And then, of course, if you're one of your biggest customers decides one day to stop drinking, that has tremendous ramifications on
What you're saying, Mitch, is dry January is a bad idea, and we should all be very careful.
So yeah, you don't want Caroni to happen again, right? So yeah, you know, 1970 was a tough year, and you see the Trinidad government, you know, start to invest in Caroni to keep it open. By 1975, you know, owning it outright and keeping it going until the early 2000s, till when it shuttered. And yeah, you know, obviously, it's only now that in the last few years people have really started getting so excited and paying so much for these bottles of Caroni. But yeah, if when you go to Trinidad, the ruins are still there. But yeah, the distillery is long gone. So yes, Black Tot Day, not great for for Caroni or a few of a few of the Guyanese distilleries as well. But so moving on from 2022, we're going now. Oh, we should note as well. You won a lot of awards with this rum as well, Ollie. Congratulations.
we won lots of awards, and that yeah. People like to drink. Good, brilliant. I'm glad they enjoyed drinking.
But yeah, I think this was the first year where we really started getting, you know, some recognition and started, you know, IWSC being, you know, one of the awards that really really has a lot of respect in the industry and really means something. And yeah, to be able to take out the trophy there for this rum was a good nod, I'd say, for for
I mean, it is
third
nice
year
to
in.
it is nice to have your peers try. I think the bit for me more than any awards that's important is the bit I feel very humbled by is anytime you go to a show and someone tries it and says, "I really like that." That means a lot more, frankly, than the awards, because those are real people. You're not in a competition setting where they're trying to look for some idea of quality. You want something. What you really want is the rum to really speak to people, to mean something to them, to have resonance. And I think I find that personally, I find that more when you get the chance to go to shows and meet people who are trying it. So so far the reaction generally has been pretty good. Thanks largely, I think, to yourself, Mitch.
Yeah, no, I think the liquid does all the talking for us, which is great. You know, I think for anyone who appreciates this style of rum or these more complex, more interesting, you know, higher ABV rums, I think it's very hard not to like it as a rum lover, you know. And I think sometimes in the rum world as well, we can be in our own bubble with other rum lovers and aficionados and rum nerds like myself, and we all get excited about the higher ABVs and the more complex, tricky ones. And one of the things I find interesting at shows is, you know, if they're in that camp, if they're ready for that level of flavor, then, you know, they love the Master Blender series. But for a lot of people, you know, who might be just getting into rum, they will lean towards things like Finest Caribbean because it is that lower ABV. It's a bit more approachable if they're still sort of near the beginning of their rum journey and getting into things. So yeah, no, it's always nice to present. It's always nice to see each country's reaction to different years and what they prefer and what they go to as well, because you know, everyone has a preference or everyone has a special moment when they've tried one of them, and I think yeah, it's always interesting to see what people say and like about it. So now we go to 2023. So I mean, again, possibly even more complex than the years before.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we'd kind of created a way of blending. You know, as I say, Black Tot has always been for me a place to learn, right? It's a place to learn about different techniques, different ideas, to explore both history, but also our own kind of internal what we can do and how we can work. So the bit that I really enjoyed in 2022 was creating all of these intermediate blends. So you create something, but the end result of that is that we had lots of remnants of these intermediate blends. You know, I've still got bits from 2022 from most of the countries, but it gave us so much depth and it gave us so much ability to create different things. So we immediately thought, okay, we'll do that again. We'll create intermediate blends to work with, because then we can balance the flavors better and we can create this deeper, more complex rum. However, it does create its own challenges in terms of trying to put it together, and obviously complexities of working with rum and different rums, and getting even bottling halls to understand what you want them to do and why. But that's why we continued that process, because we enjoyed the depth it created by building up these intermediate blends. It also gives us loads of time, right, for integration, because one of the biggest problems with rum from a blender's point of view is trying to get integration between these different styles of spirit that are often fighting. You need time and lots of oxygen, lots of basically a bit of water as well. So what we were ending up doing is creating intermediate blends, reducing the strength, leaving them, letting them settle, then creating the next blend, building it up. We didn't have the giant vats that the Navy had, so we've ended up doing it piece by piece over the course of about 6 months. But I mean, it works. More or less.
But it's amazing to me when you describe this process that you have time to work on any of the whiskey brands or anything else that you do. It feels like this would quite easily be a full-time job just by itself, just on master blenders.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about all blending is there's an awful lot of waiting around. So, you know, there's an awful lot of making something putting it to one side and waiting it for it to turn into something else. So there is a lot of work that goes into these things. An awful lot of work goes into MBR each year. If you try to quantify it in just how many hours you're actually doing things, it's probably a lot less than maybe it seems. And a lot of that work is being patient, particularly when it comes to working with third-party companies, which is a lot of what we had to do for 2023. You're starting these projects essentially a year ahead, or in the case of now, we work almost 2 years ahead. So you start these projects a long way ahead, and a lot of the reason for that is because you're going to have to wait a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see it unfold, and obviously each year I think everyone's excited to see what you've done with it and what direction you've taken with it. And yeah, this is so complex with the blends within the blends in your own super blends. It's quite a tricky one to pick apart. But one thing I love about this flavor wise is, and one of the things I found at shows around the world when we've done these tastings is people seem to be drawn to certain I know clusters of flavor or certain groups of flavor. Like if they like the chocolate or the richer, heavier molasses style, they tend to be drawn towards something like the 50th or the 2022. The 2021 had a lot more fruit that was coming through on it, and a lot funkier, and really appealed to the Sergio Moraths and the Jamaican rum lovers out there. And then 23, I think, had this really lovely balance where you've got, there's still a lot of that chocolate. There's still, and you can see from the blend percentages here, a lot of Guyana in there, a lot of the 2022, which itself had that real dusty chocolate note that you mentioned. But then so much fruit comes through as well. And it's all, I don't know, almost like, reminds me a little bit of like chocolate raisins as a kid, that blend between the fruit and the chocolate, but just like perfectly combined. So.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely went heavier on Guyana, and it was very much the kind said to me, like, let's kind of go back towards 50th. Let's try and be a bit more rich and navy. But one of the bits we probably did a bit higher on is there's a little bit more Jamaica, 9%. It's a little bit higher than in some of the earlier iterations. And also in terms of that Jamaica, you've got a mixture of two things, right? You've got some much older Jamaican rum, and then we've put younger Worthy Park in, just because we wanted that freshness and that zestiness. And I mean, maybe that's your raisin, Mitch. Maybe that's your fruit kick in the middle, with your chocolate. I loved everything about doing this because we were using these intermediate blends we'd had, and we were blending more stuff into them. We also started using stuff that we've been laying down. So we've been buying rum and laying it down ourselves, which, it's, from a personal point of view, it's a pleasure to see something grow and see something particularly in your own hands. So we were buying rum. Some of the rum in this is rum that we bought from Skier that would have been used for Finest Caribbean, like the Barbados component, for example. And then we've bought wood and we put it into wood. And we've been kind of running that as a program to build up more rum that we can pull from, more flavors that we can go to. So it was 2023 was, in some ways, it's not a massively significant year, but in a lot of ways, from me as a producer point of view, there's loads of things on this that I get to nod to and be like, this was the point at which it really started clicking, and I feel really passionate that 2023 was a really important year for me for rum in terms of what we could do.
And that's interesting that you touch on that with the components from the Finest Caribbean coming through in this, because you can see where we've got the 5-year Foursquare with 3 extra years continental aging, or the 3-year Worthy Park with the 3 years extra continental aging. So it's interesting to think, even then, when we brought in those components to do the Finest Caribbean masterclasses and do the deconstruction of the blend, even then you were putting down rum, which has later become used in something like this.
we had to buy them in bulk just to get you a few bottles. It's, you know, what else could we do?
Was it 10,000 liters of each? Amazing. It's the minimum amount. Um, and I guess a couple of other interesting additions this year. So first time we had Worthy Park in our Master Blenders Reserve. Obviously, we use it in Finest Caribbean already. But also the first time introducing Grenadine rum in there, and the first time introducing 10 cane in there as well, the lost Trinidad distillery that was playing with cane juice based rum.
Yeah, so the 10K wasn't anything other than I was sent a sample and I really liked it for this blend. So I bought it for this blend. And it wasn't thought through. Right back to the beginning of Black Tot, you know, you as opposed to being a massive rum geek who's doing all the research before you try anything, I'm quite often trying stuff and then afterwards being like, oh, I wonder what made that taste like that. And what, you know, so I'm not bottle hunting, you know. I know you do a lot of that, Mitch. You're always looking at new rums, and I look at rum, bottled rum, from a producer's point of view. So I'm always going out and trying to try other people's stuff because I think it's good to understand what's going on. But I'm not searching for those single casks and those individual things, because from my point of view as a blender, that only teaches me one thing, what that bottle tastes like, which isn't quite as useful as a concept or an idea or a country or a style. So when I look at the casks of rum, I'm looking at something that's usable. I'm not. Does that make sense? So I tried that and I thought, oh my God, this is usable. This is really good, and I can definitely use this. And then afterwards, I looked up and went, oh, well, that's different. I guess that'll be an interesting thing for Mitch to talk about at a later date.
I'm like, Ollie, why are you putting cane juice in there? What's going on?
And the Granada is slightly different because that came in quite late on. You know, similar to even using the flagons. We wanted we wanted a rum to give it weight, to give it certainly this kind of old fruits note, this like almost like baked peaches, and it just happened to be something we were looking at for another project. Again, we buy rum all the time on the basis that one day we'll do something different with rum. One day we'll get around to actually making something else. So we're always buying this rum for these other projects. And I tried it. Sukhinder said to me, "Oh, you just need something." And I went back to the tasting room and I saw the sample on the desk and I thought, well, a bit of that and a bit of that, and give it a go. And it worked really well. I mean, a lot of blending is that. A lot of blending is. I know you hate me saying this, Mitch, because you want it to be really thought through all the time, but an awful lot of it is chance. You know, I kind of described it the other day. It's like you've gone for a walk. You took a map with you. You had an idea of the trail you were going to go on, and as you got there, you got to a turning, and there's just something about that way that's not on your map that looks a little bit more interesting today. And I feel that happens an awful lot in blending, that you get taken a slightly different way, or the route you thought you'd take, there's a tree falling down on it, so that's not going to work. So you've got to do something else. And that's, you know, quite often you'll blend something, it doesn't quite work the way you thought it was. It doesn't deliver quite how you thought it was. So you have to change. I think, you know, that Granada component is exactly that. It's the route you didn't know you were going to walk down.
Do you find that freeing as a blender, obviously coming from the whiskey world where it is so regulated, working within Scotch whiskey especially, which is obviously what we specialize in with Elixir. Is it freeing to be able to go, you know, here's some other completely different island, you know, different raw material base, and be able to experiment and play with that variety?
Yes. I'm not sure. Like, I don't feel particularly constrained in my other work, right? Because there's still loads of areas for exploration. I'm I really don't have an issue with regulation. I think regulation's a great thing. I think in some ways rum can do with some more regulation. It's a great way of protecting quality. But what I would say is that the ability to reach to different flavors is really interesting, and it's less freeing and more that there's a challenge there that needs to be met. That's great. It's a motivator. Certainly, it also means that if you are, it's a little bit like opening the spice cupboard. If you're just cooking for yourself, right? Great example. If I'm cooking for someone from Italy and I say I'm making a ragu, the pressure on you in your mind over what's traditional is quite high, right? If you're cooking for yourself and you open the cupboard and you're like, you know what, that will probably taste really good in that, and you put it in and it tastes really good, that's a joyous experience. And I kind of feel like rum has that a lot more. No one's judging you. It's a much more open place. It's a more open community in that way. You can do a little bit more. So I'd say that side is more free.
Yes, there's nothing quite like making Italian food for Italians. It's one of my favorite highlights. For anyone that is tasting along with us at home, I hope you're enjoying this, because this is, for me, very exciting, seeing them all side by side. But I really recommend going back and forth between some of the years, and when you're trying some of these, revisiting the 21 next to the 23, or going to the 22, and just seeing what comparisons and contrasts you find between them. Because even now, just going back to some of them, there's certain notes which jump out of the rums more now that we've tried the other ones and coming back to it. It's really really interesting side by side. So, but this brings us to the reason why we're actually here today. Our brand new Master Blenders 2024. And again, you've changed tack this year. We've done a different thing entirely. And for the first year ever, we've got this hero country with Barbados making up the majority of the blend, followed by Trinidad at 25%. Jamaica at 5%, a much smaller proportion of Guyana this year at 5%, and quite a small amount of the perpetual blend made up of the 2023 and the Navy flagons. So I guess first of all, can you talk a little bit about such a marked difference to how you've put together the other blends, and the numbers are much easier to follow this year. So it's basically found it much easier to talk about at the shows.
The big numbers are definitely easier to follow, and there wasn't an intention towards that, apart from when we were doing the final blend, because we were making so much of it from Barbados. It kind of we didn't make as many changes. We were quite happy with how it sat pretty early on. I guess the biggest change being concentrating on one country, and that country not being Guyana, gave a completely different inflection to the whole blend. And the reason for doing that was, again, the challenge and wanting to change the style. So, going right back to the beginning, and you look at those flagons and you see those changes, and those changes dictated by chance. I mean, I'm a big fan saying that historic spirits production is largely driven by economic factors. It's driven by changes in culture, and it's a great reflection of culture. Today, most spirit production, rum, whiskey, gin, you name it, we're lucky because we're really driven by flavor. We're driven by this desire. A lot of people are driven by this desire to make a really great product. I feel like that's a real change in terms of the science is better, the understanding is better. And it allows you to do what I would call intentional making. So you're intentionally trying to get somewhere. The flagons are examples of rum where they were trying to get a style that people wanted, but the flavors would change every year or all the time because of availability. Now, we obviously have some availability restraints, but because, frankly, we're privately owned and can do what we like, we can be completely focused on flavor. So our intention is to make a particular type of flavor. So our intention this year was to really celebrate rums from Barbados, mainly because it was different from what we've come before, and because I don't think anyone and we had ever focused that way. And it also gave, to be completely honest, it also gives a direction that you can look at a couple of years in advance, start buying rums, start bringing rums in, start looking at rums for that. You know, as I said, we've already started work on 2025, so it gives us a great structure to work with. In terms of the Guyana being so low, the perpetual blend being so low, that is just because in terms of trying to celebrate the rums from Barbados, we had to lower those percentages. I mean, that became the driver. The driver became make the rum from Barbados first, and then play up and down to try and celebrate. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting how pulling the Guyana down to just 5% really lets that fruit come through from the other countries. And I think Chanel said it best when she was saying it's like biting into a juicy pineapple. It's really got that mouth-watering juiciness, fruitiness to it. It's really incredible. There's also some pretty ridiculous components in here, like a 22-year Mount Gay pot still, 26-year Caroni. Again, all of the Jamaica rums. You've got playing in here some very old casks of rum. You know, it really is when you look at these cask breakdowns on the website. I think everyone would just love to try each one by itself and then try them all together, and it's just every single part just looks incredible.
Well, I think one of the things with that is if you try them all on their own, I'm sure you'd find one to be like, this is amazing on its own. I mean, that's inevitable. I mean, I find, you know, obviously blending is a personal thing. I don't think it's I don't really believe in, despite having had to do it, I don't really believe in the shared experience of blending. It's like, you know, it's not paint by numbers. You're trying to express your position, and no one else can see it. Right? So no one else can view that. Though all the individual components have to be good quality, you're trying to get somewhere, right? So it's really important that people understand you're trying to make something. It's not just a case of picking really good things and throwing them together and hoping for the best. That's not what you're doing. Although I sometimes think it probably looks like that's what we're doing. In terms of the blend for this year, so we started with Barbados, and I had a real clear idea in my head of what I thought Barbados rum was. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm not saying it's as limited as my tiny vision, but you know, that idea of juiciness, that idea of fruitiness, of being sweet, honeyed, approachable, that for me is Barbados rum. I'm very much I loved in my early journey of rum, and I'm talking very early before I knew absolutely anything, I would drink things like Mount Gay. I loved those rums because they're approachable and easy. You know, I remember Foursquare coming in to when we still at Whiskey Exchange, and it's just great, easy drinking rum. So that had to be a cool thing here, was try to make that and then try to build upon it.
No, I think that marriage between the Barbados and the Trinidad as well, which, you know, as we said earlier, has that beautiful stone fruit, peaches, apricot kind of notes. The combination of those two together with that little Jamaica accent is, you know, yeah, it's so markedly different from the other 4 years, and yet, you know, you can still tell it's part of the same family as well.
Yeah, I mean so hopefully, I mean, you get as well as the age is really kind of pushed by the Jamaican component. It's not, that's got most of the older rums in it, and that's the bit that's giving it that slight swagger, that slight dustiness, that old rum feel. As you say, the peaches, the stone fruit coming from Trinidad, don't really pop. And back to the conversation on Caroni, the one we used here was more fruit driven. It wasn't as diesely. I mean, it was heavy, but it wasn't heavy. The only issues we really had was that we only had X amount of Mount Gay, so that controlled a lot of the quantities that we had. It controlled pretty much everything else. So I actually have remnants of almost everything apart from Barbados. We have no Barbados remnants left, except to use everything we had. And the Mount Gay was really the limiting factor. We're lucky to have got that rum. We're really lucky that Mount Gay were happy for us to talk about it being from Mount Gay, because we don't always share that information. But what with their focus on transparency at Braclady, I think Remy are relatively happy for us to be transparent about talking about their rum.
That's really nice. It's yeah, I mean, it's having and I think that's been one of the nice projects as well. I know, we've always spoken to each distillery and asked permission to be able to talk about them, and yeah, it's lovely that they have given us permission and trust to talk about them as well. And I hope that's one of the things we do well as a brand, is to champion and talk about them and where that rum is coming from, and hopefully people like what we've done with it when you've put it together as well. So it's yeah, absolutely delicious. It's and I think for anyone who's tasting along, or anyone who's sort of thinking of buying different ones, it's I think 24 is, for me, certainly the most approachable out of all of the blends you've done. I think it's dare I say almost sessionable, which would be an expensive hobby to have, but it's I think it's, even if you're just starting your master blender journey now and just joining us on the 2024, I think it's such a great example of the whole range. And if you like your fruitier styles, if you enjoyed the 2021 or the 2023, I think you're going to love the 2024 as well. I think for the people who love those, the sort of heavier, more classic navy styles, shall we say, of things like the 50th and the 2022, I think it's such a nice counterbalance. I think it really shows the variety, what a lot of those same distilleries can do, but just in different proportions, different orders, because obviously we're working with a lot of the same countries, same places, but markedly different flavors each year. So it's yeah, you've done it again, Ollie. It's very impressive. But so Master Blenders Reserve 2024 is out now. You can get it from all of your favorite rum retailers. If they don't have it on the shelves, please ask them to bring it in and they will find it for you. As you mentioned, this is a more limited run this year, so only 3,000 bottles made of the 2024 compared to previous years, which were normally around 5,000. So a little bit more limited, but obviously if you're watching this today on Black Tot Day, hopefully there'll be still plenty available for you to find before it all goes out. So Ollie, anything you would like to share on this occasion, 5 years into your annual blending tradition?
Nothing specifically, Mitch. We're probably having as much fun today as when we started. I think we've kind of grown, as I hope came through today. We've really grown with the rum, learned with the rum. We are now doing all the blending in house, which is also a fantastic thing. I mean, that was one of the best days I've had, was messing around in the warehouse, moving rum from cask to cask and cask to vat, and watching you open flagons of rum like a joyous child. And I'm really looking forward to 2025. to doing this all over again, doing something different again, looking at maybe a different country and a different perspective, learning a bit more about a different perspective on rum. I'm going to do it with you.
I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic. But no, well, thank you, Ollie, for yeah, such amazing work, such amazing service to the rum category. It's a wonderful brand to have a chance to represent, and it's yeah, such a nice feeling every year to just know something new and incredible is going to come out that I get to taste and work with, and hopefully everyone watching enjoys as well. So, so thank you everyone who has joined us. Thank you everyone who supports us and the brand. You know, we're an independent company. We're you know, one of the up and coming rum brands, hopefully, but we really appreciate everyone who supports us and who's got behind us and who shares on socials what you're drinking, and when you find us in a bar or a shop or you're drinking it at home, it's yeah, always a pleasure to see everyone enjoying the rum. So so to everyone out there, on the 54th anniversary of Black Tot Day, shall we do the toast, Ollie?
Well, it's with you, Mitch, so apparently we have to do the toast.
So there are tall ships,
There are tall ships,
and there are small ships,
and there are small ships,
and there are ships that sail the sea,
and there are ships that sail the sea.
but the best ships
But the best ships
are friendships.
are friendships.
So here's to you and me.
So here's to you and me.
Cheers, everyone. Happy Black Tot Day. We hope you love the new Master Blenders Reserve 2024. Go and ask your retailer or favorite bar for it. And we will see you at the next rum shows very, very soon. Cheers.
Cheers.